Hey dudes, welcome back to another episode of our Rhomas Men's Team podcast. You are about to listen to one of our prior team meetings. If you ever want to join one of our live sessions that we have every Monday and Friday, head over to rhomas.com. That's RHOMAS.com, and put your email in and we will send you a live link every time we record. We generally record on Mondays and Fridays. So if you ever want to be on the actual podcast, like we bring men up all the time to talk about their goals, talk about their obstacles, etc., head over to rhomas.com. And then also, if you want to help support the channel grow and also have access to exclusive content, book reviews, extra whiteboard sessions, etc., and some coaching sessions, head over to patreon.com and support us. We would love it. But if not, no biggie. We'll see you on the live sessions. Later, dudes. Enjoy this podcast.
Oh yeah, well let's do it. We're jumping in live. Wes has some goddamn things to throw out there. So do I. But Wes, how the hell are you? Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day, man.
What's going on, brother?
Dude, it's been a great weekend. I am learning more and more about cognitive behavioral therapy, and I thought we could talk about a couple topics. There are a few things that I've learned so far.
Yeah.
Delco Jim, what's up? I saw him in the comments.
What up,
Kaizen,
DJ?
Jordan, what's up, all? But yeah, man. And then the scorecard, I landed at an A+ this week, or I'm sorry, last week, Monday through Saturday. My Saturday scorecard's kind of abysmal. I don't do journaling. I do probably like 70% of the scorecard on Saturday, but Monday through Friday, I typically nail every single thing except for like one thing. Sometimes sleep, sometimes weighing myself, etc.
Hell yeah. Actually, I'm getting that Discord. I'm getting the scorecard right now. I asked for it on the Discord and I forgot to check. But
cool.
I'm on it this week.
Cool. How about you, man? How's the weekend going so far?
The week's been good, man. This weekend was a stand-up and shows and a live podcast, and then we also did like another podcast thing during the day. So like we generated a bunch of like Patreon stuff, and then
cool.
had like just a ridiculous night on Saturday. So I'm still coming back to earth, but it was fun. It was a good time, and it was I'm excited to. The month of May was like an absolute, and you had this too. Was just like an every weekend blur, tons of traveling, all kinds of stuff. And now the month of June is going to be just kind of regenerative and focusing on the basics.
Oh yeah, man. I can definitely relate to you on that May thing for sure. But you've got it harder because I don't have to sacrifice, much sleep, and I've got flexibility with my work schedule where I can, if I get to bed at 1 a.m. after like a big work event, I can still sleep in. So, but yeah, I don't know how you do it, man.
Well, you just have to do it. Like I genuinely hate staying up late.
Oh yeah, same.
But it was made the most of it, and just trying to get myself to a point. My ultimate fantasy again is just like I have a little bit of property, I have a house, and I'm generating income by just like writing books, creating content, and like I can just chill. If I I can go do stuff and if I want to, but like eventually this I don't have to do it now, but that's my eventual goal. So that's the
Hell
dream.
Yeah.
That is the dream.
Would you want a compound like the McCusker compound?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I want an uncomfortable level of compound. Brittany's kind of freaked out by it, but I genuinely want like all my friends to like move somewhere relatively close and just like divide up a huge plot of land.
Oh yeah.
But she's like, so. But I'm like, all right. I'm a slow rolling her. I'm like, yeah, all right, we'll see, no problem.
Dude, what your family has is amazing. I mean, so I got a client here. The dude is worth a crazy, roughly $500 million with a B. So he can't stand California anymore. Just hates it. He lives in this like obviously gorgeous part of California, but can't stand the government. So he's moving out. So he's making phone calls right now to build a compound. The funny thing is he's asking friends, to go and do it.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Which is kind of a little intense because the friend group that he's asking is not exactly like his best friend group. So it's a little like, it's like me going up to like an acquaintance and be like, yo, I'm moving out of California. And like, you're on the list. Like, let's move out to Idaho on my compound. It's a little, but like once you get to that level of wealth, there's no level of inquiry that's off, that's off boundaries for you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's honestly kind of what Joe Rogan did. He moved out of California, and like a lot of people were like, "All right, let's go to Texas." And it's like,
Yeah,
it's also this. I mean, this is like a kind of a random aside. It's also in terms of like politics and all that stuff. It's like, say what you want, but when a bunch of like super billionaires and millionaires start moving out of certain states, like you'd be surprised how quick those politicians are going to start running stuff back and being like, "Hey, you're kind of really devastating our state revenue. So
yeah,
could you get back over here? We'll flip
yeah,
flop. We'll do the stuff."
yeah.
It's so funny. We actually believe this now. Come get back over here and bring those
Oh yeah,
millions of dollars back into our state.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, dude, it's just here. This is the way I think about it. And again, this is like, like you were saying, Wes. This is like a very off the table conversation for the majority of people because it's like, But then again, it's kind of not. It takes a little bit of communication and like, hey, like let's just move close to each other and like, because it just it's cool. But again, I don't get it, like people start to get freaked out when they're hearing about that kind of stuff. But it's like for me personally, I'd love to take like my family members, close friends, and live in some relative proximity and
yep.
maybe grow our own food and have guns. I don't know yet, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Kaizen was he said perfect. Texas is the place to do all the stuff you just said.
Yeah. But yeah, either way. So but dude, so what's up with the CBT before I get going on fucking compounds and stuff and freak everybody out?
Yeah. By the way, we should talk about this sometime, and I think I can talk about this without having to put things through compliance. But um, that is why my belief personally is, and because of the way I grew up, is to make. How do I say this? For me personally, I feel morally obligated. Not giving this to any advice to anybody else. Morally obligated to make as much money as possible because I definitely understand that money does not create happiness. Totally get that, but I've certainly know for sure what it's like to experience that not having money creates a shitload of unhappiness, um, or at least is a major part of it. And but the reason I say is because like if you want to create a compound, good luck doing that without money. So I just
Yeah.
want to plant that seed to eventually have a healthy conversation with the dudes of like, I think some people out there, unfortunately, can fall back on the concept of like, oh, money's the root of all evil. It's like, really? Let's walk through that. Certainly,
Mhm.
you can use it to be a complete asshole, 100%. But you can definitely use money like the way I've seen money used beautifully, sending kids to college, buying kids houses on your plot of land, like all that stuff. So we should have that conversation sometime. I think it might benefit some guys, including myself.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's so funny you say that because it's like, in terms of the, let's say like, because a lot of people get the idea, and and it is a good idea that like a lot of like people are like, oh, this is what I don't like about the world, and if we all kind of link hands and stand there non-violently, which has worked on certain things. I'm not like disregarding that, but I think that's one aspect of it. There's also like, hey, there's a bunch of money floating around, and if we all grab a bunch of it, you can start like expediting that process and really moving stuff,
Oh yeah,
moving things about the way that you'd rather see them. But again, the getting of money is such an emotionally charged issue because it's one of those things that we have in life that we're like it becomes immediately apparent where you fall in. But it's again like you have potential, you can do more. So I agree, Wes.
yep,
I think you should do as good as you can. You don't want to obviously like the old like the movie what is it Hook when like the guy you don't want to be the dad who has to like throw his cell phone into the river and be like I've neglected my entire family for my
yeah.
boss. There's definitely a happy medium, and I think a lot of people when confronted with the pressure of money fall into the side like that shit's just evil. It's like yeah, there certainly has bad aspects to it, but people were doing bad shit before money was even invented, which I guess was like the the axial age like 800 BC or whatever. It's like we were
I don't
fucking
know.
each
I'll
other
take
up
your
before
word for it. Oh yeah,
yeah, we were, and again, maybe it was even before that, but I think largely, I think it was around like 200 to 800 BC. But, yeah, like we were fucking each other up before that. So, like, it can be used for bad, it can be used for good. But I agree with you. It's like just try to figure out a way that does that doesn't completely like betray, what you'd like to actually, do with your life as well. So,
yep, 100%. Yeah, it's about finding that happy medium, that Venn diagram that works. Um, so yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there in case anybody
true
was
that.
was thinking about that.
It's a good life mission. It is a good life mission, man, to try to max
Yeah,
out.
yeah, definitely. While keeping your morals and values and core beliefs intact. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And Kaizen, good luck on the bike ride with the lady, man. He just
Hell
left a
yeah.
comment saying.
Go
Um,
get it.
so yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy. So let me tell you where the origin of this started. So I was in counseling with my girlfriend, and which, by the way, I think everybody should go to to a psychologist with their significant other. And I would, and Matt, I don't know how you feel about this. I would actually recommend that as soon as possible. Like as soon as possible. As soon as like you kind of getting serious with somebody, or maybe even a little bit before that period, meeting with a counselor or psychologist. If it's a good one, they help you have great productive conversations. Have you experienced that, Matt?
Yeah, man, I think I would say, especially like you were saying, especially if you're serious, if you're living with someone, and as soon as you start fucking like bickering like a lot, or even like again, you could do it preemptively, but it might be kind of tough because you're like, yeah, everything's great, blah blah blah. So I feel like as soon as you hit that first kind of like struggle, and it becomes immediately apparent that it's not like immediately resolvable, and like it helps because what it does is like you have two people and there's a power dynamic, like I win, you win, I win, you win, and then you put a third person into it who obviously has some savvy in the field, and then it like you have this other person who kind of strips the power from both of you and like, let's just go through this and let you guys talk it out, right? So it's like, yeah, dude, I think it's one of those things that people go like they associate it with like like I'm not doing that, all that therapy talk,
Yeah.
and blah, blah. And and that does, you can go overboard with it for sure, but it's like at least try it, because it can be like they'll hit you with stuff that's so you're like, I never thought of that. Just being like, when we're arguing, like, well, let's call a pause and come back to it when we're not angry.
Yeah.
Sounds so cheesy and so dumb, but then you do it and you're like, God, this works so much fucking better than
Oh,
screaming
dude,
at each other.
100%. And Zach just said that him in the comments, him and his fiance had this conversation yesterday, said they don't screw it up. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, even if you're not arguing, like if you're about to go into a next phase, go and set up 3 sessions with a
True.
counselor, just saying, hey, what does this next phase normally bring? What is the stress? Whether that be we're getting engaged, or we're going to get married, or we're going to have a baby, or we're going to move in together. What are the typical patterns that can be toxic? And what are the anecdotes to those patterns that we could know ahead of time? Man, I wish somebody would have told me that years ago. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be weird. It's not this like, doesn't mean that you're unhealthy. It doesn't mean that the relationship's unhealthy. It just means other humans have fucking lived before you and gone through these, and they've learned the patterns. So you don't have to learn them on your own.
Yep. I mean, this was what religion was for. They used to do
Right.
this. They used to be like, hey, you're not getting married until you talk to this guy. And, now it's unfortunate that they kind of like demanded money from everybody and made them feel guilty about themselves. They didn't have to do all that. But that
Yeah.
framework for being like, hey, like you're about to do a serious thing, like talk about it to someone who, again, it's also the thing with a priest. It's like, what the fuck do you know about this?
Yeah, it's a little rough for
Yeah,
me.
exactly. So it's like, fuck. Then there is that detached observer. Then there is wisdom that can come from that. But also, like, yeah, I think it's just a good thing in general to like reinstate that as almost like a normal thing. Be like, hey, we're moving in together. Let's go get some sort of plan together, around this,
Yep.
rather than just letting our personal dynamics play out and hopefully they don't fucking clash. Which is like, yeah, good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah. So this is where now this is why I stress so much when I talk to people asking me for career advice, and I try to give myself the same advice as well. Because of the way our economics has sort of developed, like our economy has developed, we develop very siloed skill sets. Even I would argue that we've developed micro silo skill sets. So this is what I mean. My girlfriend and I were in counseling. This was a while ago. And we were having some hiccups. And I say this respectfully. I knew a large percentage of our hiccups were because of this one particular flaw in thinking. It was a lack of relationship, or too distant of a relationship to reality, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and so we meet with the counselor, and I tell the counselor this. I say, hey, my hypothesis is essentially that things are landing, and I'll just say this, I don't think my girlfriend would mind. Certain things are happening and they're being massively exaggerated, like to the
Mm-hmm.
point where it becomes like a little thing that should be nothing becomes unworkable, like to a very unhealthy degree. Again, these are just some of the things. So the counselor immediately said, well, so I said, in summary, my issue that I'm trying to work on for our relationship is accuracy. Like, I think that should be one of the prerequisites of, if something happens, let's take a step back. Wait a second. Did that thing happen? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like, so for instance, I'll just pick and obviously an extreme example is like, oh, that's an orange. And it's like, that's not an orange, that's an apple. Right. So let's not talk like, and let's not react as if that's an orange. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Now, that's obviously an extreme example, but like the way that would manifest in, let's say, in some sort of relationship is the stereotypical example, right? Like I think we've all, or many of us have experienced where you have a girlfriend or wife and she has a dream that you were cheating on her,
Sure.
right? And then wakes up and is a little grumpy from it, right? Like, and you got to deal with that. And then, like, as the guy, I mean, have you ever experienced that?
Yes.
Yeah, or know other people who experience it, right? And as the guy, it's like, I'm sorry that my dream self did that, and you want to try to be empathetic. But if that's taken too far, like at some point, you as the guy, right? You say, I didn't cheat on you, right? Like this was a
Yeah.
dream, right? Like we shouldn't be having 4 hours long argument about
Yeah.
this particular thing because it clearly did not happen, right? So that's an example of like, hey, you're acting as if it's an orange, as if I actually cheated on you, and it's not. It's an apple,
Dude,
right? It's
every time that happens, you gotta go, that's so crazy. I had a dream you cheated on me, but I forgive you.
yeah,
I instantly
yeah,
forgave you. It's crazy.
yeah. So, I mean, now
No
that,
way.
yeah. So that's kind of now. My girlfriend and I have never particularly gone through that particular example, but I've in
Sure,
the
I'm
past
sure, sure, sure.
I've gone through that example. So anyway, so I tell the therapist. So I initially say like accuracy is important. I feel like in human communication, and she's like, "Well, why is that important?" And her and I not got into it, but we had a healthy disagreement about it. I said, "Of course it's important. Like you cannot tell." She's like, "I said if you look at the nucleus of almost all psychotherapies that I know for like healthy psychological development, one of the cornerstones is accuracy. Like have your beliefs and have them be workable within the reality of the world.
Sure.
Plus, like the self-help books, like they say the same exact thing. Because if you're delusional on things, it creates this massively skewed behavior that it's very hard to work with other people on. So I said, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, these are things that are cornerstone in reality. And she's like, well, I'm not an individual therapist. I'm a relationship therapist. There's the problem, right? You're micro siloed. You've disregarded, right, the holistic point of view. Does that make sense? Am I making sense right now?
You make sense. I think what she's pointing to is the fact that, reality is subjective. And she was saying there's reality and then there's the shared reality. And she only cares about the shared reality.
Exactly. So here's the problem that, and her and I had a pretty good conversation about this. One of the issues, let's say, with relationship therapy is that it doesn't take into context that it's two individuals, right?
Sure,
So
yeah.
like there should be prerequisites. And then, by the way, eventually she agreed. Like eventually we had a really good discussion about, and I gave some examples, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to pinpoint exactly what reality is because the world's just too abstract and communication's too abstract. But you can come up with a healthy degree. Like if you're a certain amount of standard deviations away from what is reasonable interpretation
Mm-hmm.
of, well, how mad should I be if I had a dream about somebody cheating on me, right? Like
Sure, yeah.
there's a certain amount of reasonable degree that you should land inside. If you're outside of that, that's going to turn into a pattern where you're going to interpret a whole shitload of things that are just not workable. So anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
so then it kind of triggered me to go back and study some cognitive behavioral therapy again. And dude, bam, they talk about it right there. There's a book, I forget what book I got, but they literally talk about your relationship to reality. And they call them, they say that's the nucleus of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to develop your mind to really have as tight of a relationship to reality. And they say avoid thinking errors. So I wanted to bring up some thinking errors because I think it could really help some dudes, including myself, to talk about it, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, no, absolutely, man. Like I said, I agree with what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with it. There's the with couples therapy, I think they should do one-on-ones, and then so you get to know both people individually. It is made up of two individuals, and then because there's also stuff people won't say in front of the other person.
Right.
So it's like, let's go one-on-one, and then I'll bring you guys together and see how close I can get the authentic person I met to the authentic person, and then letting them be that people around each other. Like that seems to be kind of reasonable. But yeah, dude, let's go through some CBTs.
Yeah.
I know exactly what I think I know what you're going to say right now.
Yeah. So there's three that I've just relearned and they were phenomenal because it's very applicable towards myself and in my relationship as well. The first one is overgeneralization. That's one that a thought pattern they talked about, overgeneralizing things. And that is also linked to universal statements like you always, you never, or it is this way. Very, very fascinating stuff. So for instance, I had a friend deal with an issue where he had a shopper's card that was still linked to an ex-girlfriend. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like, like a Costco card or something like that. It was still linked, but there was no communication, and the dude just kept on using the card and never fixed it because it's just like, I don't know. He like, I swiped my card, like,
Yep.
and so somehow that came up. So, but his female counterpart was so concerned because they still shared accounts.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's not like, you can't just say sharing accounts like that. We're talking about a shopper's card. Sharing an Acme shopper's card is significantly different than sharing a bank account.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't, so overgeneralizing of, oh, you just share accounts. And like that's an unhealthy way of approaching like the interpretation of that thing. So that's the first thing, overgeneralization. The second thing was it was like, give me a second. Exaggeration. So taking something that is true, but then multiplying it by a certain multiple and making it this bigger thing than it actually was. And I think we've all experienced that, like exaggerating the result of something, exaggerating the language in our head. And they talk a lot about that. Like the qualifying words that you use in your head can be massively unhealthy. So, oh my gosh, he or she did this and it means this.
Yeah.
My world is done. And love is very tricky because Disney wants us to explain things in these exaggerated terms in our relationship. You are my everything. It's like, really? Honestly, and I hate to even say this out loud, but I think the way we are taught love is incredibly unhealthy. Like unconditional love. Really? Really? So millions of women that are being beaten right now in their marriages, you're saying that shouldn't have conditions? You say that's a fun one?
Yeah, that's a funny one to bring up.
Right? Like, but like the logical person to me, the analyst person to me says, no, it should not exist like that. Like clearly it should not exist like that. There are clearly conditions in which you should remove your love from someone.
Yeah.
Right. Does that make sense? So Matt, I don't want to keep on rambling. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that's I think it's an ideal, and it's good to have ideals, and it's also good, like you were saying, to be like, well, there needs to be some sort of backup plan because there's ideals and then there's reality, and it's like you were saying, like, like you are my everything, you are my this, you are my that. There's like this almost this like there can be this loss of self into the other person, and it's good to kind of have your few people rub each other's edges off, but I think what you're talking about too goes into like the history of romantic language in general and how I think a lot of it sprung out of like when religion faded from importance. People then started seeking the how can I experience the transcendent? And they're like, oh, I'll just experience it in this other person then. And then that started being like, my love. Dude, people used to get married. Their parents would be like, you two, married, next.
Yep.
And, and it's like, we're like, what the fuck? And it's like, I understand.
Oh, that still happens today.
Yeah, and I understand the drawbacks, and I do get that. At the same time, it's kind of an extreme reaction to be like, you are literally the meaning of all purpose in my life, and it's like, man, that's a lot of pressure, man. That's a lot of pressure on another person, and it's like, or let's both be as cool as possible and have fun together. And if if you fucking punch me in the face, like I'm out of here.
Right.
Exactly. That's not fun. And again, you can go back and forth. You can see people through bad times, and maybe you recognize the potential in them, and they're not showing you their best self, and there's something to be said for like having faith in their potential and seeing each other through these hard times. Like again, all this stuff's very complex, and everyone has their own thoughts and feelings around that. But yeah, like again, like you were saying, Wes, it's like there comes to a point where we can all agree, like, hey, like, all right, he's your everything. He's your everything, and he takes your money and beats you and doesn't let you have a cell phone. It's like, well, there's another everything you can go have if you get out of that everything, So
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
man, there is, like I said, there's definitely a fine line between all of that, and like you were saying, the relationship between reality is an important one, and it's so hard to discern because we all see reality kind of differently, but there you can get kind of down to brass tacks, and it's like, how much of your thinking stemming from like your fantasies, and how much of it is stemming from your actual day to day, moment to moment experience, and it's like, yeah, it's important to get that in line.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the positive side, it doesn't, it actually feels good. Oh, you're my everything. You're like all that stuff. That feels good. But the problem is, on the reverse, the flip side is equally as exaggerated. So then when something bad happens, oh, now you're taking away my everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so if
Sure.
my everything is threatened, it's my whole world is crashing down. And that's the problem with exaggeration. Again, it's you're several degrees away from reality. And then the problem is that your reactions are going to be correlated with your interpretation of the circumstance. That's the major problem. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely. I was actually thinking about this today, and this kind of ties in line with, like, when people say like your big self and your little self, or like your ego
Mm-hmm.
self or your awareness, all that stuff. And I think, and this is something I was thinking about today, and I think it has a lot to do with this. Like, our brains are designed to notice when we're being threatened on some level, whether it's like, people are coming at our self concept or making judgments on us. And it's like, I think of it like it's an alarm system. We all have an alarm system in our head, and there's like, we don't want to be violated in certain ways. But the problem is that process can, like you were saying, through exaggeration, can get to the point where, like, instead of having a sensor on our door, we have sensors on the lawn, and maybe like a camera on our neighbor's lawn to make sure no one goes from there to get in our lawn. And then our alarm systems get tripped, but it's like a squirrel in our neighbor's yard down the street in reality,
Yep.
but it's triggering our alarm system, and it's like, bam, 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 bam.
Yep.
So if we can develop the awareness to go, you can see yourself react, and you're having a real reaction, and that is reality. But there's another level to you where you can observe what's going on and say, that's just a neighbor in my squirrel's yard. I'm actually okay. But it's like,
Yep.
yeah, man, that's a tough process to delineate, because again, you don't want to under delineate to the point where your thing doesn't go off until someone's in your bedroom with a knife to your
Right.
throat, and you're like, oh
Right.
shit, So it's
Yep.
like, and it's different for everybody. Like, how wide do you cast that security net? And it's like, it's a very, very difficult conversation to have and figure out.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good part of the topic as well, because this concept comes up in nutrition all the time.
Mm.
The idea of bio individuality is a very appealing topic. Like, oh, you're an individual. You're so different from everybody else. What you can eat is going to be different from what everybody else can eat, right? That's not true. That's true within reason. Like, yeah, there might be 10% different, right? Like, some people are, like Matt, you said you're celiac, right? Something
Yeah.
like that. Is that what it's called, right? Gluten intolerant. That's true. But I could also tell you that vegetables are good for you, right? You might not be able to eat a certain type of vegetables. Some people can't eat nightshades. I think it's like 1 out of 20 people, like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But sometimes I think we take, as a society, we can be sold on the idea that we're all massively different. That's not true. Like, we're actually, the opposite, I think, is true. We're all massively the same with
Yeah.
micro degrees of deviation from that. So that's why it's like, yeah, make sure the alarms are going off. And for you, the alarm might go off 10% later than mine, but it shouldn't be 80% later than mine.
Yeah.
It should be within a healthy sort of boundary that is reasonable. And
Yeah.
that's what I think this thought error pattern comes up. It's like, exaggeration is to get you as being close to reasonable as possible. Because, dude, you and I both know that sometimes relationship communication can reach a level of unreasonableness that it's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Like, you're no longer talking about anything real. Like, you're having fights on top of the fights on top of the fights. It's like, what the
Yes.
fuck are we even talking about right now? This is
Yeah. No.
crazy.
Yeah.
This is
Exactly.
crazy.
Yeah. You're fighting about what you actually said or didn't say within the fight itself that launches
Oh,
into a
yeah.
separate fight. And yeah, it just becomes insane. And then every time whenever I'm in that, I step back and go, this is what I always try to ask myself. I go like, what is this of the person saying that I can definitely say 100% is valid? Because a lot of times I'll get something thrown at me that I'm like, part of me is like, fuck, that's kind of right. But let me just like not acknowledge that right now and point out what's wrong with you. And then I'll go
Right.
into a quest, and then they'll be like, blah, 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 and I'm like, all right, I've significantly flustered you enough to where you'll leave that thing about me alone that I don't want to think about right now. And it's like,
Yep.
I can, but it's like, and but that's also happening. You typically in the reverse of like, you pump that little nerve, and they're like, what are you talking about? Blah, 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 and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, yeah, it's easy to get sidetracked, but I always try to stop and go, what can I focus on of this that I think is 100, I'm 100% online and, on board with, and then building from that little thing rather than being like, here's all the shit that I think is bullshit. I'm like, hey, this is true. I do agree with you on this. And but it's like, again, by the time this has occurred, we're both like,
Right.
like in our head.
Yep.
So it's hard. It's very hard to do that, man. And it's like, yeah,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think I like the CBT stuff because again, they do go into like cognitive distortions and how like
Mm-hmm.
we have these patterns, like you were saying, that we just deviate from we can set a shared reality and stick to it pretty easily for the most part.
Yep.
And you were saying we can accept that there'll be 10 to 20% difference, but it's like, yeah, like you were saying, Wes, I think it's the best one. Let's not say always,
Mm-hmm.
because like that's a word that kind of can send people into a tailspin. That's rarely ever true.
Yep.
So,
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
please, yeah, go. The CBT stuff is nice.
Oh, dude, I think every person should study it. I think
Yeah.
literally it should be mandatory study because and then they label these things. So, by the way, the third pattern that they brought up was future telling. So,
Yeah.
future telling is, and you can combine all these, but future telling is saying, okay, and this is what's going to happen as a result. And it's like, are you sure about that? Now, I totally understand how human beings were built with a prefrontal cortex that can make reasonable assertions about probability of outcome in the future. But when you're in an argument, you're not using the prefrontal cortex, right? This is pure limbic system saying, oh my God, Armageddon's happening. So, for instance, like if you get the trifecta of these, right, you get a universal. So you say, and we've all been guilty of this, including myself. So you say, you always do this,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's say, you never, or you can always, any universal, right? You never call me when you're going to be late. It's like, never call you, right? So I'll say, you never call me when you're going to be late. And then, so that's a universal. And then I say, it is obviously what you're thinking there is that you don't respect me, right? So I'm exaggerating it, right?
Yeah.
So like you don't expect me, you don't respect me. And because you've done it like that, that means you will never respect me in the future. So this has to stop.
Yeah.
Right. So I used a universal, I exaggerated the claim, and I made a prediction about the future.
But
Well, it's like,
it's also mind reading too. We're like, and this is why you do it. It's like we also try
Yep.
to think like we understand people's motives and like, and I know why you did this, and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a great one. They do talk about that as well. So those four things, right? You just
Yep.
like, what is the other person supposed to say to that?
Yep.
Right? Like, nah,
Yeah.
to all of it.
Well, typically
Right.
it's not. You do all that stuff always, all the time, and you always will because I know why you're here. And if everyone's like, what? So yeah, dude, I'm telling you that's like a really, I think, a good place to start and just trying to like gain some sort of mental center, or just know like, dude, there's another one. Black and white thinking's really good. When you're like, well, it's like this is just how it is. It's this. There's this kind of thing, and there's this kind, and it's like maybe or maybe not. So it's like, yeah, man. No, I agree. I think that's a good place to go. And again, it's like there's nothing wrong. There's almost like a taboo around setting some sort of intentionality around relationships and like how you communicate. And it's like most of the baseline of like if you're just spit out into the world and it's like, all right, relationship, go, no assistance. Typically it's not the best. So it's like, yeah, I agree, man. Adding that kind of stuff and adding it to everything you do, it helps big time.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm just using it in the context of relationships, but you can use this for yourself, for your own thoughts, just with a monologue inside of your head. You can use it at work, anywhere with your friends. Like knowing that these are actual patterns that have been studied, it will allow you to say, "Oh shit, I do this." It's literally as simple as like, I'm going to try not to do it.
Yep.
Like I'm going to force myself to not exaggerate. Today, I'm going to force myself to not exaggerate. And instead of saying like, "Oh, if this happens, I'm going to die," how about changing that mental model to, "Oh, if this happens, I will very likely be okay."
Yep.
Right? Like that's the reality. If this happens, I will be okay. I will figure it out from there.
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, so I thought that like that going through it again really helped me clarify and sharpen some of my thoughts. So I wanted to share it with the guys because this stuff is so fundamental, man. It just impacts every other area of your life.
Yeah, and also too, it's like, with the couples counseling, even if you have insurance, it can come out to like $25 copay or so, depending. That's like with really good insurance. So you
Mhm.
can even worst comes to worst, you can even do a $20 workbook and go through the steps. Like
Yep.
if you're like, hey, we just don't have the time, we don't have the money, it's like, well, Amazon, you could buy used workbooks typically are written there, but still, it's like you can do this. It's just like, can you get over that awkward conversation of being like, well, I don't want to do that. That's weird. It's like, well, it's kind of weird how we communicate. When you really get into the level of like how much you kind of deceive yourself on a normal day to day basis, it's pretty disturbing. Because like you
Oh
were
yeah.
saying, Wes, it's like, we're like, we're right in our heads. When you kind of scratch below that surface every now and again, you go, oh my God, I do the same fucking bullshit. Shit, fuck.
Yep.
But it's all about developing, in my opinion, the strength to acknowledge the fact that you do that as well, and try to like to absorb as much of the, when someone's ringing your alarm bells, there's a chance there's a grain of truth somewhere in it.
Mhm.
Somewhere. Even if it's totally ridiculous and this, that, and that, there's a chance there's like a 1% of it. If it's like activating your biology, typically, not all the time, but typically there's something to it where it's like, all right, I got to be flexible in some domain.
Yep.
But again, you don't want to go overboard with that and be totally reshaped and remolded. But
Yep.
so yeah, man, yeah, it's definitely it's a big one. It's a big one to be able to do that, and kind of the CBT I think is a great place to start by, like you were saying, the black and white thinking. I think you kind of described catastrophizing, like if
Yep.
this happens, and going all the way to like I'm gonna fucking die. It's like,
Yep.
no, you might lose $50 and that'll suck,
Yep.
but you won't. You will be fine. Yeah, man. I think it's a great place. We should slap together some a little list of those and pop them in the thing.
Oh
But
hell yeah! And I think we should do put some in Rhomas U, like that kind of stuff,
yeah,
definitely.
big
Because
time.
this stuff, like every time I read them, like oh shit, like I did a little bit of that, or I'm guilty of a little bit of that. It's like these should be, we should know these so well that we can do those little jujitsu moves easily in our head every single time something happens. So just
Yeah.
that well rehearsed.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think that'd be a good thing.
Hell yeah,
Do a little
cool.
breakdown. All right, brother.
So you said you had something to bring up.
It's funny. You kind of just that was the whole thing I was thinking of this morning. It was the same exact thing. We mental twinned again. It was just that whole idea of being like that big self, little self distinction, and how it's like you
Mhm.
hear a lot of people saying like, I'm gonna give myself ego death. I need ego dissolution, but it's just like, yeah, I don't think it's about that at all. And I think the hallmark, and I like circle back to this constantly. The hallmark of meditating is basing your as much of your actions out of that part that watches you notice things, if that makes sense. So you walk in, your girlfriend has a hard day, blah 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 blah, and you instantly are like, what the fuck is your problem? That's you noticing on one level, and then there's a level of you noticing that you notice, and you're like, damn, my girlfriend just pissed me off with that. I can react out of that first layer of like, what the fuck's her problem? Blah, or I can go, she just kind of pissed me off, and that's typically what people are talking about with the big self, little self, and I think the big
Mm,
self, little self is kind of like it sets up almost this dichotomy of like this one's better, this one sucks, and it's like typically, yeah, it's better to have that little bit of distance to go, okay, here's what's going on. Let me proceed accordingly, rather than this like knee jerk reaction of like blah blah blah. But that knee jerk reaction also does come in handy. So it's like, and the whole thing I was talking about really goes to that level of like, you have that part of yourself that's constantly scanning for threat, constantly scanning for opportunity. And that's typically called your little self, your like immediate reacting
mm,
self. And the way I was putting it is like it's like that's like a security system. But then the
mm,
thing you can develop through meditation is a guy watching the security camera. And he's like,
mm,
holy fuck, we're being breached. And there's another level of perception where you can say, you're actually fine, man. What you learn to do over time is base your thinking out of like larger thoughts that when thought actually activate, like we said last week, your parasympathetic nervous system that slow you down. Like the base fundamental belief of I'm essentially okay
mm.
calms your biology down. And you can
Yep.
root yourself in that versus like I am essentially not okay. And when
Yep.
you think that and believe it, your heart rate increases. Literally, like it increases. So that's the
Yep.
process of meditation of like structuring your thinking so that you're more often than not, or like you were saying, Wes, this is where the CBT stuff comes into mind. Like how many times we're hitting that not okay button when in reality we actually are okay and all we need is a little bit of time to pass. So it's
Yep.
like, and meditation helps you kind of gain that kind of awareness where you're like, I'm actually cool. Because like, what's actually happening right now? Nothing. Okay, I'm fine. Versus like you were saying, Wes, that's going to happen, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then I'm going to fucking die or be poor or have no house. It's like, well,
Yep.
you have a house, you're not dead. So base yourself out of that, versus that. So that was pretty much all. Kind of dovetails perfectly in all the stuff you were saying.
Hell yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, just to throw it out there as well, had a lot of discussions around making gut decisions and so on. And I think that there can be healthy versions of that. But I think a lot of people take it overboard. So for those people who tend to do the future telling thing, and that's essentially what it is, right? Like, oh, like I'm going to go this way because it feels right. What I would urge everybody to do is if you heavily believe that, write down your predictions. Like write them down and then check back in a week or 2 weeks and literally do the math on the percentage of correctness. Just do that. Because me working in finance, that's kind of my job, is to do math on people's predictions, etc. And I could tell you people are mostly wrong. Like there's an entire book written, there's several books written about this. So it's very, very fascinating. So now obviously don't take it overboard and not use your intuition and so on, because if you're well rehearsed and well practiced, then your intuition is almost not like intuition anymore. It's almost like a stimulus response reaction, because you're so well practiced, like an athlete would be. But for most people, going with their gut and future predicting puts their life into a tailspin and they don't even recognize it. Like usually over emotional people have that problem, but then they're right every once in a while and they say, oh, see, I was right. And it reinforces this like emotional tornado they constantly have, because every once in a while they catch a win. But it's like, yeah, but it was the expense of 80% of your losses, but you never realize that because you're too emotional. Like you're not thinking accurately.
No, I mean, there's definitely, again, a lot of this comes down to balance, because there's definitely, yeah, you can get lost in that whole, like, dude, just close your eyes and the answer will appear. And again, it's like, I'm big into intuition. I like it. But I think, to be fair, like, you can get people who try to intuit, like, the price of Dogecoin or whatever, and it's like, yeah,
Right,
good
right,
luck.
right.
Just go
Yep.
down to the very, very basics, dude, of, like, intuiting, like, I don't know. Like, there is something to be said for having, like, I think intuition is more for things that are calling you towards them in a generalized sense, rather than like
Mhm.
the price of like how much wood is going to cost as a commodity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I think they get
Yeah.
conflated sometimes, where intuition's more like, I don't know, I just keep getting these thoughts about this thing, like the fact that I want to train dogs. I keep thinking about dogs. Dogs always pop up. Intuition's more like, this keeps popping up. Let me just move into let me move into a
Right.
space with dogs and see how I feel, which is kind of what intuition is, versus like, I just have a feeling today's gonna be the day. Lotto number 64224, and it's like, maybe. I mean, maybe some people are psychic like that, but it's like, yeah, I agree. I think it can't hurt you if you're an intuitive person to also back check to make sure you're not deceiving yourself.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because it's
Without a
like,
doubt.
I think you need both. It's one to be like, wow, that's all bullshit. I just run on intuition. It's like, okay, that's cool. I've ran on intuition and fucking crashed into a bazillion walls. So it's like
Yeah.
a little bit of
Yep.
math wouldn't hurt me, So it's
Yep.
like, yeah, man,
Yep.
I do agree. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. Cool,
But yeah,
brother.
man.
Anything else?
No, that's it, man. Today I'm just gonna take the day. I'm gonna get my scorecard going and go food shopping based on my scorecard, and
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
just get back on the green drinks, and all that stuff. But that's pretty
Fucking
much it,
right.
man. Today's Memorial Day, man. Telling people to have a good time, enjoy yourself, and yeah, man. Just we've definitely got some stuff going. The Rhomas. Someone asked about Matthew Bland asked about Rhomas U. We're gonna get that thing figured out pretty soon, so we'll toss something up. And yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
figure that
Matthew
out.
Bland. Matt's using euphemisms. It's my fault right now. Rhomas U is not up.
No, it's not.
Matt and I have done everything's done. I need to figure out the last piece of, giving the URL, like all that kind of stuff. So we're like on like the 1 yard line. As soon as it's launched, what we're going to do is we're going to launch it to the dogs, and then we're going to grow it from there. So it should be out very soon.
Yeah, man.
All
Hell
right,
yeah.
dudes. Have an awesome holiday weekend and awesome week. See you guys on Friday.
All right, man. Later.